The people of Gibeon had heard many stories about Israel's God. They knew how the Lord had opened the Red Sea and defeated powerful kings. Instead of fighting Israel, the leaders of Gibeon had wisely made peace with Joshua. For a while, everything seemed calm, and the people continued their daily lives. But not everyone was happy about their decision. Far away, 5 Amorite kings became furious when they heard the news. King Adonizedek of Jerusalem slammed his hand on his throne. "How can Gibeon make peace with Israel?" he shouted angrily. "They have become our enemies. We must punish them before others do the same." Messengers quickly rode across the hills to the neighboring kingdoms. King Adonizedek called together the kings of Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, and Eglon. When they gathered, he pointed toward a large map spread across the table. "Gibeon has betrayed us," he said with burning anger. "If we allow this, every city will follow their example." One of the kings nodded. "Then we attack before Joshua can protect them." Another king smiled confidently. 5 armies against one city? They have no chance. Soon thousands of soldiers marched across the valleys with shining weapons. Dust filled the sky as the great army moved toward Gibeon. Watchmen standing on Gibeon's walls saw the approaching armies. One of them cried, "The kings are coming. Prepare yourselves." Fear spread quickly through the streets. Parents gathered their children, while soldiers hurried to the city gates. The elders met together and knew they could not win this battle alone. One elder spoke firmly. "Joshua promised to protect us." Another immediately replied, "Then send messengers without delay." Fast runners left the city carrying an urgent message. When they reached Joshua's camp at Gilgal, they bowed low and pleaded, "Please do not abandon your servants. Come quickly. Save us from the 5 Amorite kings." Joshua listened carefully as the exhausted messengers caught their breath. Without hesitation, he stood to his feet. "My brothers," Joshua said, "we gave our word to protect Gibeon. We will not fail them." His commanders looked at one another with determination. "But the enemy is strong," one captain admitted. That night, Joshua sought the Lord in prayer. Then God spoke words that filled him with courage. "Do not be afraid of them," the Lord said. "I have given them into your hands. Not one of them will be able to stand against you." Joshua smiled with renewed confidence. "The Lord has spoken," he declared. "We march tonight." As darkness covered the land, Joshua quietly led Israel's army out of Gilgal. The soldiers marched through rough mountain paths without stopping. Their sandals struck the rocky ground while the cool night wind blew across the hills. No one complained, even though the journey was long and difficult. One young soldier whispered, "Will we arrive before sunrise?" His friend answered, "If the Lord is with us, we will arrive exactly on time." Joshua walked at the front, never taking his eyes off the road ahead. Every step carried the army closer to Gibeon and closer to the battle that would test their faith. As the first light of dawn began to appear beyond the mountains, Israel's army silently reached the hills overlooking the unsuspecting enemy. The greatest miracle of Joshua's life was about to begin. As the first rays of sunlight spread across the hills, Joshua raised his hand. "Men of Israel," he whispered, "the Lord has delivered them into our hands. Be strong and courageous." The soldiers answered with determined voices, "The Lord is with us." Then Joshua gave command, "Charge." The quiet morning suddenly exploded with the sound of shouting, trumpets, and marching feet. The Amorite soldiers looked up in shock. "Israel," one captain cried. "How did they get here so quickly?" Panic spread to the enemy camp as they hurried to grab their weapons. Before they could organize themselves, Israel was already among them, fighting with great courage. The battle spread across the valleys and rocky hills around Gibeon. Joshua led from the front, encouraging his soldiers wherever the fighting was hardest. "Stand firm," he shouted. "The Lord is fighting for us." The Israelites pushed the enemy farther and farther back. The Amorite kings realized their armies were losing. "Retreat!" one king yelled desperately. "Run toward Beth-horon." As they fled, dark clouds suddenly gathered over the mountains. Without warning, enormous hailstones began falling from the sky. The stones struck the fleeing enemy with great force, and more Amorite soldiers were defeated by the hail than by Israel's swords. Joshua watched the enemy fleeing down the steep roads. He knew victory was close, but the sun was already climbing toward the western sky. If darkness came too soon, many of the enemy would escape. Joshua looked across the battlefield with deep concern. One commander asked, "What shall we do, my lord?" Joshua answered quietly, "The battle is not finished." He lifted his eyes toward heaven, fully trusting the God who had already sent the hailstones. His heart was filled with bold faith, unlike anything he had ever known. Then, before all Israel, Joshua prepared to ask God for something no human had ever dared to request. The battle slowed for a moment as Joshua stood on a high place overlooking the valley. Soldiers from both armies could see him. The wind became still as he lifted both hands toward heaven. With a loud voice he cried, "Sun, stand still over Gibeon." Then he continued, "And moon, stand still over the Valley of Aijalon." The people looked at one another in amazement. No one had ever heard such a prayer before. Everyone waited to see what the Lord would do. Then something incredible happened. The sun stopped moving across the sky. The shadows no longer stretched across the ground. The moon also remained in its place, refusing to disappear. One Israelite soldier pointed upward in astonishment. "The sun, it isn't moving," he exclaimed. Another whispered, "Only the Lord of heaven could do this." The extra daylight allowed Israel to continue chasing the fleeing armies without stopping. The Lord answered Joshua's prayer, giving his people all the time they needed to complete the victory. The 5 Amorite kings saw that their armies had completely fallen apart. Their brave words from before the battle disappeared. "Save yourselves!" one king cried as they fled from the battlefield. Looking around desperately, they found a large cave near Makkedah. "Hurry! Hide inside!" another king shouted. One by one, the kings rushed into the dark cave, hoping no one would find them. Outside, the sounds of battle echoed through the hills. Soon an Israelite scout spotted fresh footprints leading into the cave. He quickly ran to Joshua and said, "My lord, we have found the 5 kings. They are hiding in a cave at Makkedah." Joshua nodded calmly. "The Lord has delivered them into our hands." Some commanders asked, "Should we capture the kings now?" Joshua shook his head. "No," he replied firmly. "Roll large stones over the entrance and leave guards to watch them." The soldiers quickly obeyed and sealed the cave with massive rocks. Then Joshua turned back toward the battlefield. "Do not stop now," he commanded. "Chase the enemy. Do not let them return safely to their cities." The Israelites pressed forward with renewed strength. By the end of the day, the enemy armies had been completely defeated, and only a few survivors managed to reach their fortified cities. After the battle was over, Joshua returned to the cave at Makkedah. He looked at the guards and said, "Move the stones away." As the entrance was opened, the frightened kings slowly stepped into the sunlight. They no longer looked proud or powerful. Their royal robes were dusty, and their faces were filled with fear. Joshua called the leaders of Israel to come near. He said, "Bring your feet and place them on the necks of these kings." The commanders obeyed, showing that God had completely given victory over Israel's enemies. Joshua then spoke words they would remember for the rest of their lives. Joshua looked into the eyes of the commanders with confidence. "Do not be afraid," he said. "Do not lose heart. Be strong and courageous. This is what the Lord will do to all the enemies you fight if you remain faithful to him." The commanders nodded, encouraged by Joshua's words. They understood that the victory had not come because Israel was stronger. It had come because the Lord had fought for his people. Their faith grew stronger as they witnessed God's mighty power displayed before their own eyes. After the victory at Gibeon and Makkedah, Joshua continued leading Israel through the land. One by one, the surrounding cities were conquered. Every battle reminded the people of God's faithfulness. Whenever fear tried to enter their hearts, someone would say, "Remember the day the sun stood still." Another would reply, "And remember the hailstones that the Lord sent from heaven." The people praised God as they traveled from victory to victory. Joshua never forgot that every success came from obeying the Lord rather than trusting in human strength alone. News of the amazing victory traveled far beyond the battlefield. Travelers carried the story from village to village. "Have you heard?" they asked. "The God of Israel made the sun stand still." Some people listened with wonder. Others shook their heads in disbelief. But the soldiers who had fought that day answered with confidence. We saw it with our own eyes. The Lord gave us extra daylight, so the battle could be finished. The miracle became one of the greatest testimonies of God's power that generation would ever witness. The kings of Canaan soon heard what had happened. One ruler asked nervously, "Is it true that even the heavens obey Israel's God?" Another replied quietly, "If the sun and moon obey him, who can stand against him?" Fear spread throughout the land. Many cities strengthened their walls and prepared for war. Others realized they were not simply fighting Israel. They were facing the living God who ruled over heaven and earth. The Lord's name became known throughout the surrounding nations because of what he had done for his people. Although Joshua had become famous throughout the land, he never took the glory for himself. Whenever someone praised him, he answered, "Do not praise me. Praise the Lord." A young soldier once asked, "My Lord, were you certain God would answer when you prayed for the sun to stand still?" Joshua smiled gently. "I was certain of God's power, not my own," he replied. When we obey him and trust his promises, he is able to do what seems impossible. His humility inspired the people to depend on the Lord instead of placing their confidence in human leaders. Many years later, fathers and mothers gathered their children around evening fires. The children often asked, "Tell us again about the day the sun stood still." The parents smiled and began the story. They were fighting to protect those who had made peace with Israel. One father explained, "When Joshua trusted God completely, he prayed a prayer unlike any ever spoken before. And the Lord answered." A mother added with joy, "The sun remained in the sky until the victory was complete." The children listened with wide eyes, learning that nothing is impossible for the God who keeps his promises. The miracle of the sun standing still has been remembered for generations because it reveals the greatness of God and the power of faith-filled obedience. Joshua did not ask the miracle to make himself famous. He asked because he believed God's promise and desired to complete the work the Lord had given him. God answered in a way that no human being could ever accomplish. The story reminds every believer that the Lord is sovereign over all creation. He rules the sun, the moon, the earth, and every circumstance of life. When his people trust him, obey his word, and walk by faith, he is able to do far more than they can imagine. Even when situations seem impossible, God remains faithful to his promises. And just as he gave Joshua the victory on that extraordinary day, he continues to strengthen and guide all who place their confidence in him. If you like stories like this, subscribe to the Golden Bible Story page on YouTube, follow on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. God bless you.